SYS presents Adventures in Online Education.
Hello, friends. You're listening to SYS Presents Adventures in Online Education. I'm your host, Natalie Conway. Thanks for being here. If you're new to the podcast, first off, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. You're going to want to head over to aoepodcast.org and enter your info at the bottom of the page to start receiving the AOE newsletter. It's a little piece of positivity for your inbox. Returning listeners, you know I appreciate you so much. If you are liking AOE, you're going to love our new daily podcast, This Day in Education. Learn about important people, events, and inventions that have shaped education in the U.S. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts or at thisdayined.org. Okay, getting back to today's awesomeness, I have the pleasure of speaking with Tim Batiuk. He has worked in virtual education for over 7 years. He previously worked in self-publishing and screen printing. Currently, Tim is spending work time on agile project management and migrating services to cloud computing. And his free time is spent fixing up a new house and cooking plant-based foods. I've worked with Tim as a co-teacher and now at SYS for a handful of years. He's smart and kind, and you're going to love learning from him today. So, you ready? Let's learn something new. Hello, Tim. Thank you so much for coming back on the podcast.
Thank you. It's good to see you. It's good to hear you. It's just good to be here.
Yeah, I am so excited for the audience to get to know you today and to hear all of the cool things that SYS Education is doing and dive into some more tech talk. Before we get into all of that, though, you've been out of the formal classroom for a few years now, but I know from working with you that you have never stopped teaching. Is there anything you miss about the classroom? What keeps you coming back to work day after day?
Yeah, is there anything I miss about the classroom after a year plus of pandemic teaching? Probably less than I normally would.
Right.
But I will say, I would love to be a thought leader as far as coming up with these great tools to implement, how they work and all of that for the classroom. But I'm out of that feedback loop of what it's actually like implementing, kind of that direct lens of being in the classroom. So I miss that level of just kind of interaction and that feedback loop. And I rely a lot more on teachers and instructional coaches to kind of be filling in that piece for me. I just don't want to be out of touch. I think a lot of folks working in tech that is applied outside of their industry, so K-12 education, for example, can come off as a little like, hey, great idea, but that's not how the real world works.
Totally.
And I miss that a little bit. So I want to keep it real, keep it genuine. But what keeps me coming to work, I will say, as far as the work side of things, the tech department that I manage at SYS, I run it so similar to how I ran an elementary school classroom. There are learning targets for each week that I send every Monday morning at 8 a.m. So we view our targets for the week. We use some different language like KPIs, instead of goals, but we all understand that. And then the amount of weeks that I'm like, okay, so I need all of us to work on a project. I want us all to collaborate and create something that we kind of synthesize together. Oh, a jigsaw activity. Okay, this works for fifth graders. I'm going to have these amazing, competent adults do the exact same type of activity that I would have set up in an elementary classroom. So
That's awesome.
yeah, maybe the classroom didn't leave me, at least.
Not at all.
Yeah.
That is fun.
I don't get that many complaints. So as long as it's not too patronizing, but as a model that works for me, that kind of lifelong learnery type of thing. And with that in mind, I mean, virtual education, that landscape has not stopped changing. This last year plus has been so many changes, and that is going to keep me on my feet. So as far as keeping me showing up, being excited about what's going on in the classroom, just keeping up the pace is a challenge. Questions that are out there like, is virtual learning here to stay, are interesting ones that I like to be a stakeholder in, because as you probably remember, Natalie, back in the day when we were doing virtual ed before it was cool, we were constantly having to explain ourselves when someone would ask, but how do you do blank online? Just about every aspect of the classroom.
Everything.
I know, and it felt like we were in on some scam or scheme, and everyone else was like, that doesn't really work, does it? And we had to defend ourselves to explain
True.
it. And now it's become a norm. And not only is it a norm, it's like, is this the new reality? Or is there a type of hybrid that is going to be that new reality? I'm looking at statistics of parents who've been polled about willingness, going back to a fully in person versus online versus hybrid. That is still shifting. I'm curious to see where the needle kind of lands as far as that online learning that folks actually do want. And I am here to see where we end up with that. Yeah.
Yeah, I really hope that districts and schools keep their online aspect in some capacity. That we've learned, at least through the pandemic, that one size doesn't fit all. There's nothing sacred about online learning or in-person learning. It's just what works for whoever needs it, and to just offer those choices. And yeah, I think it's here to stay. I sure hope that it's here to stay.
Well, and with that in mind, too, what I'm curious about is if every district needs to have their distance learning model of some kind. So, Oregon, for example, we've seen that with the Oregon Department of Education as of last spring or so. What I'm curious is how much are these districts going to be working with each other to borrow the best ideas, not reinvent the wheel? I mean, that's been so much on the SYS front of what's kept us interested are these petri dishes of how can we try out these new ideas, make those stick, and then get those out to the world so that more people can be adopting some best practices. And so I'm curious how siloed all of this work is that's going on school to school, district to district, as they're having to innovate to this entirely new distance learning model. I'm curious where, from the SYS front, where that puts us. Yeah, I don't know what to expect, but that's exciting.
That is kind of the exciting part about this job, I think, and working in online ed in general, is that you really don't know what next year is going to hold or even next semester sometimes. And we just kind of roll with it. But I love what you say about collaborating and working with other people and trying not to be siloed, but instead sharing ideas and really getting the best of the best and putting that together and using that for the benefit of kids. There is one cool thing that SYS has developed recently that we hope districts will find useful. It's an app called AdminDash. Can you tell us a little bit about what problem it helps teachers solve or administrators as well, and how it's going to improve outcomes for kids?
For sure. So AdminDash was built specifically for the Canvas LMS. So this is for Canvas users, which we know there are a lot of, and we've seen continued wide-scale adoption of Canvas over the last year and change. And another thing that we've seen this last year or so is that when students are learning online, teachers, administrators become increasingly concerned about this question of how do I know what progress looks like and when I need to step in because there's something wrong. We become so reliant on what we can see in a physical brick and mortar classroom that when students are fully online, for example, doing all of their work on the LMS, from receiving videos of instructions for the work that week to actually doing the work and submitting it, the feedback with the grading, how are students actually doing? So what we wanted to do, it was create a risk intervention tool that pulled from all of these different data points that are available in Canvas, except they're all over the place and not all of them are wholly visible to the users. Canvas, as I've mentioned in the past, why I like it, it uses open API. So there are these endpoints that are available to anyone with just a little bit of developer knowledge. And some of those are incredibly helpful metrics of how a student is doing that are not actually captured in anywhere else from what a teacher, really an administrator, can see. There's just little hidden pieces of data there. So we wanted to pull that data together, but then we also wanted to synthesize all of that data into one easy to read meter, like basically a risk level. So you have a big group of students, maybe it's 20, 30, maybe it's 100, 200. I would love to see that risk level for everyone, maybe order that risk level, maybe see who's trending with the risk increasing, decreasing, or kind of flatlining. Because if I need to make some intervention choices about where my time is best used to kind of bring students up to help them be successful. I need that overview. I need that kind of mile wide way of looking at things. So that was our plan. It was all right, let's make a tool that does that. We wanted to make the data look nice. One of my first things that I had talked about with the development team was I want to throw a lot of data at people, and I want it to be beautiful data that people want to engage with. So let's make sure that when there's a meter or some arrows or all of that, let's use colors, let's use shapes, let's use some intuition of what's going on so that people want to engage with it, even if they're half aware of what the data actually means. They can kind of draw some conclusions about how to act on that and then want to go deeper because it's interesting and nice to look at.
I think that's actually really important because you can look at a graph or a chart. You can go to your RTI meeting, you can go to your data team meeting, whatever you call it, and look at a bunch of data in a spreadsheet. And it's hard in the first place to synthesize data well and to really draw meaningful conclusions and then make decisions based on those, right? And move forward. There's so much to data analysis. And the way that
Right.
you guys have presented it through AdminDash, like you said, it makes it really intuitive. You look at it and you say, that kid's green. I am not worried about a green kid right now, but ooh, Tim is yellow. And I noticed in class yesterday, he didn't even talk or chat. So it's very easy to take a next step based on just looking at it. So yeah, go on. That's just so important to me.
No, yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, the visual cues are helpful. Hey, we know that even working with students in the classroom, those simple to understand visual cues, making that data both interesting and, dare I say, beautiful, maybe even adds a little internal motivation to want to engage with it. Because as an administrator rolling out a tool like this to teachers, that adoption implementation piece is huge. And if teachers don't even want to show up because it's the ugliest thing in the world, and the data is a CSV dump that they would need macros to even understand.
Ooh,
That's not going to happen.
no way.
Yeah, sync before it even sets sail. So that was our big picture goal. Because this is an intervention tool specifically for Canvas, we did figure too that there were a couple other gaps that we could kind of fill in terms of the Canvas user experience and how this all was important to that intervention cycle. So, for example, being able to log the intervention attempts, the academic or behavior concerns, so that there's as much documentation as possible to really tell a narrative of the student's kind of success and the work that's been going in across the team. Canvas does have a feature called Faculty Journal that is, I will say, a bit deprecated. It's not a core feature that most folks see, and it is some usability issues. And so we created our own log entry feature that allows not just to write those notes, but to make it a little more rich as far as, do I want this to be internal facing only for all staff, or do I want something public that, say, the student's parent could also see through their Canvas Observer account? So, for example, a record of that last small group kind of focused learning that the student went to as part of their intervention, being able to make it very clear who has made which entry and be able to search by person or by date, so that if there are a lot of stakeholders who are involved, maybe a teacher, a counselor, a SPED case manager, an administrator, being able to differentiate those. The log entry was kind of an afterthought that we made that we ended up putting a ton of time into because the response was there, and we're continuing to find ways to make it rich and, again, interesting. And yeah, it's fun. There's no shortage of things to do with AdminDash. We're continuing to get a lot of feedback from teachers. I'm currently working on a giant list of that right now and figuring out what's going to end up on our feature roadmap. And I'm excited to continue developing this tool.
That's so neat. And it's so awesome to have that continuous feedback loop and always be improving something. So it's not just a static product or feature or app that's just, it is what it is. It's ever improving and ever meeting the needs of teachers and students. I really appreciate that you explained sort of the multi-pronged approach to displaying the data. Like there's the RTI data, there's attendance data, there's the note data as well. And it kind of, at first glance, it almost reminds me of checking your credit report when you go pay your credit card bill. If you're like me and you
Yes.
have a credit card bill every month, it is something you want to look at. It is something that it is easy to understand, but also appealing. And coming back to that, I think that's really important. And the fact that it helps you write that child's narrative. Ken Williams and I talked about that a couple episodes back, and actually Chase Orton, who will be on the podcast as well. When kids are in school with us, whether they're online or in person, whatever, we're helping write their narratives. And the more information that we have that leads us to support them better or intervene early and often, that's going to really improve that child's narrative as well. So really thankful for this. I think it's a really cool tool that is going to help a lot of teachers, help a lot of kids. And that's what we're here for, right? So
Yeah. And I'm going to take your feedback of make it more like a credit score. So we're going to get a 3-digit FICO. Is that what the score is called?
There you go.
And we're going to assign that. This is it'll help expose students to the ways that their very essence is boiled down to numbers as they enter adulthood.
No.
So nah. Well, all right, we're ditching that one. We tried it. We got the feedback. I appreciate it. Yeah.
Yeah. No, please don't do that. Oh, man. Tim, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk more about sort of that narrative and writing kids' narratives and how important relationships are in the school experience. So stay tuned, folks. We'll be back in a jiffy. What's the one thing all online schools and programs struggle with? Student engagement and the ability to truly personalize interventions. How do we solve those problems? With the use of AdminDash, a brand new Canvas LTI tool from SYS Education. AdminDash allows online teachers to see a risk assessment score that proactively identifies students who may need more specialized attention or intervention, and offers a communication log that provides an outlet for complete transparency among teachers, admin, students, and families. At just 99 cents per student per year, and with no minimum price and no fees, you can't afford to not use AdminDash. For more information about AdminDash, contact sales@syseducation.org and start connecting proactively with your online learners. All right, Tim, before the break, we were talking about tools that help students and teachers kind of write that narrative of who they are and what's happening in school. That just leads me to think about relationships a lot. They're totally at the heart of any successful school experience. If teachers are using tools like Canvas or Zoom or Google Classroom to connect with students, in your opinion, what should they be prioritizing in those designs? If you were to give teachers maybe a short list, what's on it for priorities in order to build positive relationships with their students?
That is the crux of it, especially the relational aspect, because again, thinking about the shift to online learning during the pandemic, that relationship piece was huge, not just students' relationship with the teacher, but also with each other and how important that is to their learning. My biggest takeaway as far as the priority for any of these platforms is just a focus on reducing barriers of entry for that student so that they can have a learning experience. I don't think that there's a best tool. I think that there's a best way to implement any tool, and it is with that focus on accessibility, focus on meaningful real world experience, centering it around the student. We're talking about the student's narrative. They need to be an author in that too, because that narrative is huge in terms of how they see themselves in the world. That learning needs to be collaborative, cooperative, community oriented. And none of that's going to happen if they can't even engage because the barriers to use that tool are too great. So I kind of feel like as far as, recommendation for, this platform or that, I don't have it. Whatever you use it well. And that accessibility, lack of barrier of entry part is huge. Students are so remarkable at making do with the tools that they are given, so long as they feel empowered to really have that authorial stance and want to engage with it. So even if you're using maybe something kind of substandard from a tech perspective here, if you enter that using that with, open mind, open heart, you give students all the tools that they need and make them excited, inspired to want to engage, because not having that are barriers of entry for sure. I think awesome things will happen with something even rudimentary, so long as those barriers aren't there. And that's what you need for relationships. You can't have those barriers for relationships. You need to be open. You need to feel like, now I'm getting real big picture here, but just thinking relationally with other people, like you need to know that you're gonna feel safe, that this experience is going to be something you relate to, that you're able to have fun. And that definitely makes sense in the classroom too.
Absolutely. I really liked what you said about whatever you use, just use it well, because ideally everyone would be purchasing or using the LMS that is going to be the strongest, most robust, offer everything. But we also know that there are budgets and certain things are true, and we do what we can with what we have, right? And to use it well and to think of those barriers. And then I also liked what you noted about having an open mind and an open heart, because we can't always see all the barriers. You and I have talked about universal design on the podcast before, and Dr. Katie Novak came and talked about it as well, but we can't always see all the barriers. Or kind of like how you said at the top of the episode, like you're not in the classroom right now. And so even when you develop something, you want teachers to give you feedback because you don't have that immediate feedback. So we don't
Right.
always know how this is going to look or feel to a parent, to a grandma who is, vision impaired, or to a
Yeah.
6-year-old who is having trouble with the Chromebook and clicking easily to drag things, whatever it might be. Just to be open to the barriers that we didn't even know were there. And so when students or parents tell us about them, to be responsive to that too. I think that's really important. And I liked what you said about students co-opting their school narrative, because they absolutely are. And I think one of the reasons AdminDash isn't like a credit score, and you wouldn't give a student a number because that's not going to give us great information. And so to be able to take everything we know about the platform, to take everything we know about the student and develop something that allows them to relate to us and for us to relate to them, that's really the crux of it.
I wholeheartedly agree. And you mentioned the adults at home that are helping out. And yeah, that's a huge part of this barrier of entry piece. So I'm glad that you mentioned that. Even if the student is feeling relatively comfortable with using these tools, which again is a huge hurdle to be celebrated, if that is the case, their learning in a distance environment is it's so dependent on an adult that can be physically present with them, who is invested and feeling somewhat capable to engage with the tools that they're using. And so, yeah, part of the barrier of entry is, have we explained to those adults at home what we're using, why we're using it, how to use it most effectively? Again, it can be rudimentary, but that conversation needs to be there. And anything that we can do to make it more accessible is going to be key for sure.
Absolutely. And letting them know why. Yeah, we're going
Yeah.
to use this platform, or we're going to use this app, and here's why. This is what I hope to get out of it. This is what I hope you and your child get out of it. Yeah, I think that goes a long way to building trust, and that's going to help improve relationships too. Well, like you talked about at the start, technology is always evolving and hopefully generally improving, which is lovely for us in online education and ed tech. We've talked a lot about UDL on this podcast and making learning accessible for all kids, like we just talked about in terms of relationships. They can't access you and your content. You can't really have a great relationship. Tech can be great for that. Are there any cool things that you're excited about in the worlds of Canvas, Zoom, Google for Ed, or any other platforms with which you work?
It's funny because now that I hear you say this question, I think my version of cool might be really disconnected from other people's, because the first thing that I thought about was not kind of flashy, I don't know, sparkly, innovative stuff. It was the fact that this focus, not just on a school district, state level, but really national, world level, on how these online tools are used in a K through 12 environment, many of which had been used in schools previously, but that focus, that attention, dare I say, accountability was not there. So when we see these giant shifts to Canvas, to Zoom, to Google for Education, I am excited by. I'll find this cool as the roll with me on this. It's cool that added pressure has really just added a lot of accountability that has then innovated a lot of security and privacy improvements for these platforms, because eyes are on them. And I will use Zoom as an example just because, regardless of if someone has a student in a K through 12 environment right now, I think we've all been Zoom in or Zoom adjacent at this point.
Yes.
Zoom was not super prepared for K through 12 kiddos. I think it was a experimental thing that teachers were able to make use of it well before the pandemic. But during the pandemic, I was seeing feature updates 2-3 times a month, and almost always they were security privacy focused, and they were good things happening. They were not the exciting, glamorous, sparkly things happening. Maybe I think quality of life kind of took a back seat for that year, but as far as how we are handling children's private information and how we're able to work with those data collectors on a school administrative level, that I saw so much work being done. Same with Google. Google went through a pretty big facelift from Google for Education to Google Workspace for Education. That is, I'm going to say, more or less freemium now with different tiers that largely have to do with security and reporting features. I'm going to call it a good thing, even though for some folks that does mean attaching a price tag to a previously free service. And it's because so much work was done on improving the platform this last year and a half, from Google Meet to just overall how all of the Google apps work as far as being FERPA compliant with each other. I guess the compliancy was just a huge piece there. Again, all eyes were on them. And I am glad that happened. I think that we are all left with better tools as a result of it. It's largely due to that accountability.
True.
And, Mr. B here finds accountability cool.
As do I. I'm with you. I think a lot of folks are, honestly. And it's just so true. When more eyes are on you, you do better. You perform better, you improve, and you're more accountable. It makes me think of Ashley White and I are always touting the importance of peer observations.
Right.
Not necessarily in an evaluative way, actually not in an evaluative way at all, but as a means of just saying, here, I'm going to invite some other folks in to check me out and see what I am doing well and where can I improve. And I agree, because I remember being, I think we were on the earlier side of Zoom adopters prior to 2020, and it was constantly changing and constantly updating, and they had to because their usership exploded.
Mm-hmm.
But to be able to do that on small scale as well, or just to be able, from your lens, from the tech side of things, you understand what these updates mean, and I necessarily don't. But just to see that, I think that is really cool. I think it's awesome that there are more things offered for free now, and that the things you are paying for have been really well thought out and vetted and studied and improved, and people have spent hours and hours and years improving them, and so maybe it's worth our money. Those are all good things. I don't think necessarily all the flashy things are as exciting because they kind of come and go, but the changes and the updates that really make learning safe and make it accessible to everyone, those things are cool. I like it.
Well, yeah, there's a lot of cool looking ed tech out there for sure. But if you could survive and stay afloat pandemic teaching and still be usable and compliant and, all of these other things, like you have kind of made it. So
Yeah.
it really, I think we see who the leaders are for sure. Again, using Zoom, I would not have expected the level of adoption for K through 12 actually using Zoom when I had first suggested using it at another school 5 years ago or so. I thought that was a wild idea. Why? What is Zoom? Why Zoom? Yeah. So I like seeing really this kind of sink or swim mentality who has kept up with all of these changes and tried to do their best when eyes were on them. And yeah, we got some good tools.
And even Canvas, if you think of them, they weren't originally built for the K through 12 world, and yet here we are using them, and more folks are as well. And so they're adapting, and SYS is making tools that help adapt it even better. And I just think that more eyes that are out there looking, and the more accountability we have, the more innovation we're actually going to have. So it's kind of exciting.
Agreed.
I'm with you. We have a similar definition of cool, I guess.
That's why we get along so well, Natalie.
Right.
Because we're the cool
Most
kids
interesting
at the
people
cool
at
table.
the party. Yeah.
Yes.
Clearly. I'm crying. That's so funny. Okay. I may have had the nickname Nerdily at one point in my life, so that'll tell you all you need to know.
At least you're not publicly broadcasting it, so.
No, not at all. No shame. I am who I am. Oh my goodness. This has been so fun. I want to end with a question that I'm asking everyone this season, and it's supposed to be lighthearted and hopefully a happy way to end the episode. We want to celebrate those awesome teachers who helped shape us in positive ways and helped make us who we are today. Who was your favorite teacher growing up?
I always appreciate a no-brainer question, and this is definitely one of those no-brainers. So my stepdad, who I'll call Mr. Hauk, because that's what he was called in the classroom, was my high school English teacher, was also the cross-country and track and field coach, which I did take both of those sports. So I had several periods with my stepdad starting out high school because I was cool like that. It was also my ride to and from school. So yeah, a lot of coolness here. And as an English teacher, I mean, this sounds trite, but it was the passion. Like he brought some genuine excitement that came from somewhere deep within him and shared that with the class. So there's something, I'll just say kind of emotionally vulnerable about finding those things that you are excited about in your field and being willing to expose and share that with a group of 14-year-olds saying, again, here's the thing I think's really cool. I'm going to put, all my cards on the table and hope you all think it's cool with me. And the best example I can think of that was him reading his favorite book, Watership Down. We have a copy of that on the shelf here at the SYS office also. He would read it every chapter out loud to the class. I'm sure it fit in the curriculum and standards, and I can try to look at things from a teacher's lens and be like, how much was this just kind of wedged in there? But the thing that always stands out to me about how he read it was that he had a voice for every character, and he performed every voice in the dialogue. It was shocking at first. You get that first chapter and you're like, oh, we're doing this. And then, 5 chapters in, it's, oh, we're doing this. And it was something fun to look forward to. And I appreciate that he shared that passion because, like I said, there's vulnerability to that. And it can kind of be the highlight of your day to see someone want to share that with you.
That is so cool. Does your stepdad know that? Does he already know that?
Yes, teacher? Yeah. He got a lot of references as a best teacher. So, yeah.
He's still got the mug somewhere, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Tim, so much for coming on today and talking with me. If listeners want to get in touch with you or if they want to find out more about AdminDash or just anything that SYS is doing, how can they do that?
Best way I would say would be to follow the @SYS Ed Tweets SYS Twitter feed. I am often finding out that I've posed for a photo that ends up on there or otherwise have that content just sort of ending up there. So not an official presence of mine, but one that I bet you could see my face on there and maybe give me a shout out and I might find someone who can respond to you on there.
That sounds perfect. Awesome. Well, thanks again for your time today, Tim. Always a pleasure.
Thank you, Natalie. Take care.
Thanks for listening to this episode of SYS Presents Adventures in Online Education. Special thanks to my guest, Tim Batiuk. Today we learned how products like AdminDash can help us write a positive school story for our students and help us create deeper relationships with them as well. If you liked what you heard today, please hit subscribe and give us a rating. On Twitter, you can follow me, Natalie Conway, @AOE Natalie, and the show at SYS Presents. If you're interested in finding out more about SYS education, head over to syseducation.org. This podcast wouldn't be possible without our exceptional team at SYS Education, including sound engineers Natalie Farrell and Matt Duran, and our producer, Bo Neal. Thanks for listening, and remember, we can learn new things.
Thanks for listening.